They will tell you that 1832 was ballrooms and calling cards. It was not. It was a ledger. Every soul in England sat in a column somewhere. Wages in one, debts in the other. And if a man's name drifted from the first to the second, he did not eat. You were not a person. You were a figure, and a figure can be carried forward or struck out. Verity Sowerby understood this better than most because she had once held the pen. That summer, the rain did not come. 9 weeks of it. The chalk hills went white as bone, and the Kennet water dropped until the barges scraped.
The water is let
On the
by
terrace
deed,
at
madam.
Harrowmere Court,
Any person
there was
taking
wine
it is
cooled
taking
with
what is
ice,
not theirs.
and a footman whose
He
only
is
work
dying.
was to change the ice every quarter hour.
Open.
60 paces below the terrace. 17 men fed 4 lime kilns and 2 brick kilns that never once went out, and the only spring in the parish had been locked behind an iron door since 1819. Water there cost a penny the bucket, and the penny came off a man's wages. Verity was 24, without fortune, without expectation, and so entirely unregarded that she could rise from that terrace, and no one troubled to ask where she was going. She carried a silver pitcher and a dented tin cup down to the kilns, and she gave the cup to a man who had not drunk since dawn. She thought she had given him nothing at all. It was the cheapest thing on that terrace. She was wrong, and it would take her until October to learn how wrong. And by then, a ledger nobody had opened in 6 years would be lying on a table in Devizes with her father's handwriting on it. The heat, that July did not behave like English heat. It sat on the valley the way water sits in a bowl, without moving, without thinning. The chalk gave it back. The downs above Nether Cadby were white as flour under a thin skin of turf, and in a dry season, the whole slope became a mirror that threw the sun back at anything foolish enough to stand on it. The terrace at Harrowmere Court faced south across that slope. Verity Sowerby sat at the end of it in the 4th chair, which was the chair nobody wanted because the awning did not quite reach. She was given that chair in whatever house they visited and had stopped minding. The awning was a map of the household, and she liked knowing where she stood on it. She was counting. She counted because she could not stop. It was a habit laid into her at 13 at a desk in Devizes, checking her father's daybook against the cash while he pretended not to watch her find his errors. Her mind went on doing it after there was nothing left to count. That afternoon, it counted ice. 9 pails since 1 o'clock, and the ice on that terrace had cost more in an afternoon than a kiln man earned in a week. Below her passed the sunk fence and the dead grass and the cart track the kilns burned. There were 6 of them at Raymere. 4 for lime squat and open at the top, like broken teeth, and 2 long ones for brick. None ever went cold, because a cold kiln cost a day and a half to bring back, and Mr. Threlfall did not permit one. Chalk went in at the head, and quicklime came out at the eye, and the men at the eye stood in a heat that would blister paint. Verity had never once seen anyone on the terrace look at them. The kiln sat below the line of the balustrade. You had to lean forward and look down. Mrs. Honoria Belfield had never leaned forward in her life. "I do think," she said, without lifting her head from her work, "that the Duke might have sent word before now." "He will come when he comes, Mama," said Clementine. "He will come when the ice runs out," said one of the Pollard girls, and the terrace laughed, and Verity watched a man at the eye of the second kiln put down his rake and stand with his hands on his knees for the length of 5 breaths before he picked it up again. There was no water at the kilns. The spring at Cadby rose in a chalk hollow 400 yards east of the works and had watered the parish since before there were records of it. In 1819 it was enclosed. A wall went round the hollow and a well house over the head of it, and an iron door was hung and locked, and the key hung on Mr. Threlfall's belt beside the key to the store. After that, water at Nether Cadby cost a penny the bucket. It was not sold for coin. Nothing at Raymere was sold for coin. It was entered. At 3:30, the man at the second kiln went down on one knee. He did not fall. He put the knee into the ash and stayed there, one hand flat on the ground, and none of the men near him stopped work because stopping work was noticed. Verity stood up. "Where are you going?" said Mrs. Belfield. "To walk," said Verity. "In this?" "Yes." She did not wait to be forbidden. A person who asks permission may be refused. A person who is already at the steps is merely eccentric, and eccentricity in a poor relation is tolerated as long as it is quiet. On the trolley by the door stood a silver pitcher of iced water, sweating untouched since 2 o'clock, and beneath it 3 tin cups kept for the dogs. Verity took the pitcher in one hand and a cup in the other, and went down the steps into the light. The grass had gone the color of straw and broke under her shoes. 20 paces from the awning, the heat stopped being weather and became a thing with weight, and the air near the kilns tasted of chalk and ash. The men saw her at 40 yards, and the work slowed, the way water slows behind a stone. By the time she reached the flat ground, 11 of them stood gray from head to boot, watching her come with the blankness of people who have learned that being noticed by the house is never good news. The man who had gone down on one knee was up again against the north wall of the kiln in the 4 feet of shade it threw at that hour, breathing in a shallow, rationed way, as though breath were also on account. I was tall and the wrong shape for the work. The kiln men at Reymere were narrow and stringy, burned down to rope over 10 or 15 years, and this one was still heavy through the shoulders, still carrying the frame of a man who had eaten well at some point in his life. His lips had split. There was dried blood in the cracks and gray dust in the blood. Verity knelt down in the ash. She did not think about the dress. It was 6 years old, and had been turned once and dyed once, and the ash could not do anything to it that had not already been done. She poured. The water hit the tin with a sound that carried further than it had any right to. "Here," she said. He looked at the cup. Then he looked at her face, and she saw that his eyes were gray and entirely awake, which she had not expected because everything else about him was 3/4 dead. "It is clean," she said. "It has not been used today." I took it. His hand was enormous and split across the knuckles, and his fingers, when they brushed hers, were as hot as a kettle handle. He drank the way a man drinks who has been thirsty before and knows what happens if he goes at it. Slowly, in 4 swallows with a pause between each. When it was empty, he turned it once and looked at the dent in the side of it before he gave it back. "You will spoil your gown," he said. "It was spoiled before I came down." "That is not what I meant." "I know what you meant." She poured a second cup, and it was taken out of her hand by a boy of 14 with lime burn across both forearms, who said, "God bless you, miss," in one breath and drank it in 2. She poured a third for an old man with a white beard stained yellow at the mouth. Then she filled the cup a 4th time and put it into the tall man's hand again and said, "Drink that as well," and only then registered the sound she had been hearing for some seconds, which was a horse coming down the cart track at a walk. Mr. Silas Threlfall did not shout. He was 47 neat, with the face of a man who kept accounts for a living, which he did. He wore a gray coat in July, because a steward who removed his coat could be argued with. In 19 years at Reymere, no one had heard him raise his voice, and every man on that ground feared him more than anything with a whip. He brought the cob to a halt 8 feet away and looked at the scene without any expression at all. "Miss Sowerby," he said. "Mr. Threlfall, you are in the ash." "I am." He nodded slowly as though she had confirmed a figure he had been carrying in his head, and took out of his coat a small black book the size of a hand with a pencil in the spine. He opened it. He did not dismount. "You," he said to the man against the kiln wall. "Draycott." Threlfall wrote. "And the boy." "Wick," said the boy, and then, as if it had been dragged out of him, "Tobias Wick, sir." Threlfall wrote that too unhurriedly in a small, clear hand, and the pencil was the only sound on that ground. 11 men stood in the sun and watched a man write, and not one of them moved. Verity stood up. "They have had nothing since this morning," she said. "I am aware of what they have had, Miss Sowerby. It is my business to be aware. Then you will understand why I came down." Threlfall closed the book. He looked at her then properly for the first time, and there was nothing hostile in it, which was somehow worse. "Water here has a book of its own," he said. "That is all. I do not say it to reproach you. You could not be expected to know the arrangements of a place you are visiting." He put the book away, touched his hat to her with perfect courtesy, and turned the cob back up the track. The work started again before he had gone 20 yards. The old man with the yellow beard took hold of Verity's sleeve. His name was Amos Cardew, and she did not know it yet. "Go on up, miss," he said, very low, not looking at her. "Go on up now." "I have done nothing." "No," he said, "you have not." He let go of her sleeve and picked up his rake like a man expecting a blow from a direction he could not name. She went up. Behind her, the tall man watched her go all the way to the terrace steps and did not go back to the eye of the kiln until she had passed under the awning and out of the light. Mrs. Honoria Belfield was 49 and had buried a husband of fortune, and any illusion that the world was arranged for her convenience in that order. She had one daughter to place and one niece to dispose of, and thought of these as two halves of one piece of work. She waited until the tea things went in at 6, then came into the dressing room where Verity was washing the chalk from under her nails and sat down on the edge of the bed and folded her hands. "I have written to Mr. Lowndes," she said. Verity kept her hands in the basin. "He will be at Devizes in September on his own business, and he has asked whether he might come on to us for a few days. I have said that he might." "I see." Mrs. Belfield had a low-level voice. She might have been discussing the carriage. "He is 51. He has a house in Bedford Row and an interest in a discount house whose name I do not pretend to understand. He is not a gentleman by birth and does not claim to be, which I consider a point in his favor." Verity dried her hands. "In the alternative," she said. Mrs. Belfield inclined her head as though grateful that they need not pretend. "Mrs. Ferrars at Bath has written twice about a governess for the 2 younger girls. £30 in your washing. I have said I would give her an answer at Michaelmas." "Michaelmas," said Verity. "Michaelmas." She looked up. It was not a cruel look, and there was no pleasure in it. "Verity, you are 24. You have £4 and some shillings and no expectations from me, because there are none to have. I am not punishing you for the kilns. I am telling you that in 8 weeks you will be a wife or a governess, and that if you make yourself talked of before September, you will be neither." She rose and smoothed her skirts. "That is the whole of it," she said. "I shall not raise it again." "Yes, Aunt," said Verity. Mrs. Belfield paused at the door, faintly wrong-footed because she had prepared for tears and had got a receipt instead. Then she went out. Verity did not cry. What she felt was not despair, but a very old and very quiet anger that had been waiting 6 years for somebody to name a date. She could not sleep, and at a little before 1 in the morning, she went down for a book. Harrowmere at night ticked and knocked as the day's heat came out of the stone. Verity went barefoot because shoes on that staircase carried to the servants' passage, and she had learned the house the way people who are not wanted learn houses. There was light under the door of the counting-house. She stopped. Mr. Threlfall took his port at 9 and was in bed by 10, and had been for 19 years, and there was no one else in that wing after midnight. The door stood a hand's breadth open. A man was at the desk with a shielded candle beside him and a ledger open under his hands, reading it fast, the way a person reads who is looking for one thing among many. She pushed the door. He did not drop anything. A thief drops things. This man went completely still with his hand flat on the page, and when he saw a woman in a nightgown with her hair down, he let out a breath and the stillness went out of his shoulders. "You walk quietly," he said. "You break in loudly." "I did not break anything." The door was not locked. Mr. Threlfall locks the store and the well-house, and he does not lock this because it has never occurred to him that anybody here can read. Verity came in and pushed the door to with her heel. "I could call the night watch," she said. "You could. Do you propose to stop me?" "No," he said. They looked at each other across the desk. She thought with the part of her mind that would not stop working that his voice was wrong for the county. The vowels were too short, and the consonants were finished off, and men who dug chalk at Raymere did not finish their consonants. "I'm not going to call anyone," she said. "Why?" "Because Mr. Threlfall has a book with your name in it, and I have been in this house 11 days, and I already know that I would rather be on your side of that book than on his. That said, the man is the most sensible thing anybody has said to me in 6 weeks." He turned the ledger a little on the desk. "Can you read a double entry?" he said. She laughed once without meaning to and put her hand over her mouth because of the passage. "Yes," she said. "Properly. Not the household sort. Wages, stock, store account, the 3 run against each other. My father was a banker," she said. "I kept his daybook from 13 until the day the doors shut. I can read a double entry better than the man who wrote this one, and I can tell you from here that he rules his cash column too narrow, which is what a man does when he means to write more in it than he has room for. Something happened in his face. It was the look of somebody who has been carrying a weight in an awkward grip for a long way and has just been offered the other end of it. "Come and look," he said. She did not move at once. "Who are you?" she said. "Draycott. That is a name in this parish. Half the graves on the north side are Draycott." "Yes," he said. "There is a story about that," she said. She had heard it 3 times in 11 days, once from a maid and twice in the village. And she recited it now with all the weariness she had, because it was the only weapon in the room. There is a lost heir. There is always a lost heir. The old Duke's eldest son married a woman the family would not have, and there was a child, and the papers were burned, and one day he will come back down the Bath Road and put them all out of the house. It is the same story in every parish in England. They tell it because it costs nothing and lets them sleep. Anyone who chases it is a fool, and the kindest thing is to let the dead lie. She stopped. I had not moved at all. "Yes," he said at last, "that is the kindest thing." Then he turned the ledger round to face her and set the candle where the light would fall on the page and said, "Tell me what this is." It took her 4 minutes. She knew what it was after the first, and spent the other 3 refusing to believe it, checking the rulings, going back a quarter, running the column with her fingertip. It was not the cash book. It was the wage book, and it had 3 columns where a wage book has 1. The first was what a man had earned. 9 shillings the week for a kiln man, 7 for a chalk hauler, 3 and 6 for a boy at the barrow. Ordinary. Low, but ordinary. The second was what he had been paid, and it was not money. It was notes. Ramier notes issued out of the counting house, redeemable at the estate store at the top of the village. The third was the store account. Verity ran the store prices against the prices chalked outside the corn merchant at Devizes: flour, bacon, candles, soap, salt. Threefold, not twice. Threefold on the flour, and better than that on the candles. She looked up. "They cannot buy anywhere else," she said. "No, because the notes are not money." "No, and they cannot leave, because a debt to the store is a debt like any other, and a man who cannot pay goes to the gaol at Devizes and his family on the parish." 11 of the 17, said Draycott. 11 of the 17 men at those kilns owe the store more than they can earn in a year. Cardew owes £22. He is 61, and he will die owing it, and then it will sit on his daughter. Verity put her hand flat on the page. "There is a law," she said slowly. "There was an act, last year. I read it in the paper at Bath." "The Truck Act," he said. "Yes. In force since the 1st of January. Wages in the current coin of the realm and any other manner of payment is void, and the workman may recover the whole again as though he had never been paid at all." "Then this is worth nothing." "This whole book is worth nothing. He has been breaking it for 7 months. "Yes," said Draycott, "and who's going to say so?" She had no answer to that. She turned the page instead, and that was when she saw it. The last entry was fresh. The ink still had a shine on it, and there was a faint smear at the edge where the blotting had been done in a hurry. It was in the small, clear hand she had watched form letters that afternoon from 8 feet away. "Water 4 buckets at 1 penny, charged to the account of Wick." She read it twice. Then she stood back from the desk in a nightgown, in a room she had no business in, and understood, with a completeness that made her feel sick, exactly what she had done at 3:30 that afternoon. "4 cups, she said. Draycott said nothing. "I poured 4 cups. I gave 1 to you and 1 to that boy, and 1 to the old man, and 1 to you again." 4 buckets, he said. "He will not go down to the cup. It is more convenient to round." "But I gave it," said Verity. "I carried it down. It was on the trolley and nobody wanted it, and I gave it away, and it cost nothing. It cost nothing at all." "It cost 4pence, said Draycott. "It has been entered against the boy's mother. She sifts chalk at the West Pit for 4 and 6pence, and she has him and a girl of 9, and she will pay for what you gave him in flour at 3 times the Devizes price." Verity sat down on this corner of the desk because her legs had stopped being reliable. There was a woman came down in the summer of 1830, Draycott said. A curate's wife from Cadby Parva. She brought a can of small beer to the pits in the harvest week because she thought it a kind thing. Threlfall entered it. 3 shillings over 4 families. One of them was the Cheels, and the Cheels went out of their cottage at Michaelmas and into the house at Devizes, and there are 2 of them buried in the yard there now, and she has never been told, because what good would it do? I looked up. That is what this place is, he said. Not cruelty. Cruelty stops when the anger stops. This is arithmetic. It runs whether anybody is angry or not, and it will convert anything you put into it, including your kindness, and it comes out the other end as somebody else's debt. Verity sat on the edge of the desk in the dark for a long time. Then she said, "What is your name? Your whole name?" "Alaric Draycott." "And what are you?" I hesitated for exactly as long as it takes to decide to tell somebody a true thing that is not the whole thing. "I am a lime burner," he said. She copied the wage book over 3 nights in pencil on the brown paper that came round the parcels from Devizes, because paper was 4 pence a quire, and she had 4 pounds 11 shillings in the world. She worked from midnight until the sky grayed. Alaric kept the door and did not speak. On the 3rd night, he asked her a question she had been waiting for somebody to ask her for 6 years. "Sowerby," he said. "Sowerby and Son at Devizes." "Yes, that was your father." "That was my father." She did not look up from the column. "They were the estate bank here," she said. "Since my grandfather's time. Every rent, every timber sale, every draft this house ever drew went through our counting house at Devizes. A country bank does not choose its custom. It takes what the county gives it and prays the county is honest. And in February of 1826 we stopped payment," she said, along with 60 or 70 others that winter. There were 31 bills in our hands that had been accepted and were not met. £9,400 against a reserve of less than 3,000. When the London houses would not renew, we could not pay, and once the door shut, it was over in an afternoon. "My father was found at his desk in the June following," she said. That is all I intend to say about that. Alaric did not offer her anything. She was grateful for it later. "Whose bills?" he said. "I do not know," said Verity. I was 18. The commission in bankruptcy took the books in the March, and by the time I understood that I had every business asking, they were in a strong room belonging to gentlemen I had no standing to write to. She wrote another line. "I have thought about those 31 bills nearly every day for 6 years," she said, "and I do not know one name on them." The Duke came home on the 22nd of July without warning in a chaise with 2 horses, which was itself a piece of information for anyone who could read it. Crispin Draycott was 43. He had been Duke of Raymere since 1819 and wore it the way a man wears a coat he has had made twice and got right the 2nd time. He was slight fair going gray, and he listened with his head a little turned as though making room for what was said. I was on the kiln ground within the hour. He did not send for Threlfall. He walked down the cart track in his traveling clothes and asked the men questions. Not the questions a landlord asks. He asked whether the West Pit chalk was flintier than the North, and when Amos Cardew said it was, he said he had thought so from the look of the lime, and Cardew, who had not been asked his opinion in 19 years, stood holding his rake and did not know what to do with his face. Then the Duke turned round and said, "In front of every man on that ground, Mr. Threlfall, why is my well locked in a drought?" "There was an arrangement, Your Grace." "Unlock it, Your Grace. The arrangement is a contract, and I am not certain that I have the power." Then you will find that you have said the Duke pleasantly, and it was open before dinner. And for 3 days the men of Nether Cadby drank as much water as they wanted for nothing, and there were 2 of them who cried, and Tobias Wick carried 4 buckets home to his mother, and would not let anyone else touch them. On the last of the 3 days, Verity carried the pitcher back to the house and left the tin cup on the step of the well house. Verity watched all of it from the terrace and felt the ground move under a thing she had been certain of. That evening the Duke found her at the end of the terrace and sat down in the 3rd chair without asking. "I banked with your father," he said. "Everybody in this county did, and everybody in this county talked a great deal of nonsense about him afterwards. And I never joined in it because the wonder is not that 70 of them broke, but that any survived. I'm sorry for what happened to him. I do not suppose anybody has said that to you." "No," she said, "nobody has." "Well," said the Duke, "it wanted saying." He looked down the slope at the 6 chimneys standing against the last of the light. "I have been away too long," he said. "Things grow in the dark." The boat came up from Bristol on the 9th of August and tied at the wharf below Nether Cadby with 40 tons of coal for the kilns. 2 of the boatmen were ill before they cast off. 1 was left in the shed at the wharf because he could not stand, and Mrs. Godsell, who kept the beer-house at the bottom of the village, took him in out of decency, and by the following night the boatman was dead, and Mrs. Godsell and her brother Nathan. It went through the low end of the village in 4 days. 9 died. It was a great number for a place of 260 souls, and it did what that sickness always did, which was to arrive without warning, kill within a day, and leave the living certain they had done something to deserve it. Nether Cadby burned tar. The barrels stood at the 4 corners of the village from dusk to dawn, and the smoke lay along the bottom in the still air and rolled up over the white slope, so that from the terrace the hill looked struck across with charcoal. They lime-washed the walls. They buried at night without the bell, because the bell frightened people, and there was an order against gatherings. A local board of health was constituted under the Act on the 12th of August. The Duke of Raymere was its chairman. Mr. Josiah Fenn, surgeon of Devizes, its medical member, and the vestry sent the churchwarden and the overseer. Mr. Fenn was 52 and had been in practice 30 years, and he explained the matter in terms nobody present could argue with, because they were the terms in every journal in England. It was the air, an exhalation, a miasma rising off filth. It came out of the ditches and the middens and the crowded rooms at the low end, and it fastened on the intemperate and the ill-fed, which was why it took the poor and left the terrace alone. The remedy was cleansing whitewash, the removal of nuisances and tar. The board resolved accordingly. Not one word was said about water. Verity did not know anything about medicine. She had no theory, and if she had been asked to guess, she would have guessed wrongly, because she had read the same journals as everybody else. What she had was a ruled sheet and the habit of putting things in columns. She made 3. The first was the dead by name in the order they had gone: Mrs. Godsell, Wheeler the boatman, Nathan Godsell, the 2 Pierce children, old Kimber and his daughter at the wharf cottage, the Salter woman, a man called Dine off the towpath buried on the parish. The second was where each of them lived. The third was where each of them drew water. She walked it herself a day and a half in the worst of the heat, asking at every door in a village that had every reason to slam its doors. She was let in because she was the woman who had come down with the pitcher. 9 dead. 9 drew from the canal or from the ditch that ran down the east side of the lane and stood in a green pool behind the wharf cottages in a dry season. Not one drew from Cadby Spring. 3 households of the village had kept their key to the well house or their arrangement with the man who held it. The Halloms at the mill, the vestry clerk, the blacksmith who had an understanding about it that everyone knew of and nobody wrote down. 9 dead in the village, none in those 3 houses. She wrote it out fair and took it to Mr. Fenn on the 17th of August. He read it standing up, which was the first bad sign, and gave it back, which was the second. "This is very neatly done," he said. "Thank you. It is coincidence, Miss Sowerby. The air settles at the low end. The ditches are there, the crowding is there, and the water is drawn there as well, because that is where the people are. You have not shown me that the water carries it. You have shown me that the poor live at the bottom of the hill, and I could have told you that without a table. The 3 houses are at the bottom of the hill," said Verity. "The mill is the lowest building in the parish. The mill has had nothing." Mr. Fenn looked at her with tired patience. "The Halloms are well fed," he said, "and temperate, and they do not sleep 6 in a room. Madam, you are proposing to instruct a board of health, and you cannot because you may not address it. You are not a member, you are not a parishioner, and you are, forgive me, a woman. If you wish this laid before them, it must go through a member." "Then I will give it to a member," said Verity. She gave it to the Duke. He read it at the library table with a candle at his elbow, all 3 columns, twice. Then he folded it once and put it in his breast pocket and said, "Thank you. I shall look into it." He did not unlock the well. She waited 4 days. She told herself there were reasons. Boards did not move quickly, and a contract was a serious thing. On the 5th day, she went and read the contract. It was not hidden. Threlfall had put the deeds in the second press, and had not troubled to lock it in the same spirit in which he had not troubled to lock the room, because in 19 years no one had come into it who could read what was there. There were 4 documents concerning the spring: the enclosure award of 1819, the order for the well house, a memorandum of the iron door and its cost £11 charged to estate repairs, and an agreement of the 4th of March, 1828, between the Duke of Raymere and the canal navigation and the lime and brickworks, granting for 20 years the water of Cadby Spring. Verity read it through and again with her finger on the line, and sat back in Threlfall's chair. At the foot of it, in a broad, sloping, confident hand, was the signature. Raymere, not Threlfall, not a steward acting under a power. The principal in person in 1828, selling the water of the parish for 20 years for £440 a year, of which not 1 shilling had ever been spent in the parish. She sat with it a long time. Then she copied it out word for word on the back of a corn factor's circular. Then she got up and took down the loose bundle of forms behind the wage book which she had walked past 3 times, and found the specimen sheet. It was the master pattern for the store note, the engraver's proof with the wording, and the figures, and the place for the counting-house stamp. And across the bottom corner, an endorsement in the same broad sloping hand. Approved. And a date. The 19th of December, 1831. Verity stood in the middle of the room and did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was very short. The Truck Act had received the royal assent in the October and had come into force on the 1st of January. Every attorney and land agent and ironmaster in England had spent the 11 weeks between reading the schedule and working out what it covered. I had not signed that paper in ignorance of the law. He had signed it 13 days before the law began. She found Alaric at the North Kiln that night and told him, and he heard it without surprise, which told her something she did not want to know. "I always," Alaric said. "What?" He always. It is not a secret in London, only in Wiltshire. In 1825 he was in the South American mining stock up to his neck along with half the peerage, and when it went he went on renewing. There is a discounting house in Bedford Row that has held his paper ever since, and every acre here is under mortgage to it, and the interest is more than the rents. Verity was quiet. "Then the £440 for the water," she said, "goes to London, and the store goes to London. Every penny of the difference between what he pays those men in paper and what he charges them in flour goes up the Bath Road 4 times a year, and it never comes back. Threlfall is not the thief. Threlfall is the pen." She looked at him in the red light off the kiln eye, at a man with chalk in the creases of his hands who had just recited the mortgage history of a dukedom. How, she said, does a lime burner know that? Alaric picked up his rake. He did not answer. Tobias Wick went down on the morning of the 26th of August, and it was not the heat. I had been sick in the night and again at first light, and had come to work anyway, because a boy who did not come was a boy whose place went to somebody else. He lasted 2 hours. He set his barrow down carefully, which the men remembered afterwards, because he set it down so carefully, and then he sat in the ash and could not get up. They carried him into the shade of the store shed. Nell Wick came up from the west pit with the sifting sieve still in her hand. She looked at her son, and she did not scream, and she did not kneel down. She went across the ground to the well house and put her hand on the iron door, and Silas Threlfall came out of the counting house and said in his ordinary voice that the water was let by deed, and that any person taking it took what was not theirs, and that he would be sorry to say so before a magistrate, but he would say it. The well had been open for 3 days in July on the Duke's own word, and had been locked again on the 29th while the Duke was at Devizes on business, and nobody had asked him about it since, and he had not raised it himself. Nell Wick stood with her hand on the iron and said, "He is 14. "I am aware of his age," said Threlfall. "I entered it." Alaric Draycott came across the kiln ground with the 8-pound hammer from the brick shed. He did not run. That was the detail that frightened people afterwards, because a man running can be talked to. He walked the length of that ground at an ordinary pace, with a hammer at his side, and the Board of Health stood on the counting-house step, all four of it, and Threlfall in front of the iron door, and 11 kiln men, and Nell Wick with her hand on the metal. "Move," he said. Threlfall moved. The first blow took the hasp and bent it. The second broke the staple out of the stone, and the lock and the chain came off together and hit the flags with a noise that went up the whole slope, and on the terrace, 3 of the Pollard party stood out of their chairs to see. I put the hammer against the wall, pulled the iron door back on its hinges, went in and came out with the tin cup. She had left it on the step of the well house on the 29th of July. On the last day it stood open and nobody had moved it, and it had sat there through the whole of the sickness with the dent in its side. He filled it and gave it to Nell Wick, and she took it to her son. Then he stood in the doorway with his back to the water and waited because he knew what came next. 4 men took him, and he did not resist, and the carter said afterwards that it was like getting hold of a wall. Sir Everard Bassett was at Harrowmere that day, a magistrate of 19 years standing, who had sat at the Special Commission at Salisbury in January of the year before and had concurred in every sentence handed down. He came down the cart track, looked at the broken door, and at the 11 men standing off who had not lifted a finger, and said, "This is a riot." "There is one man," said the Duke. "There is a crowd," said Sir Everard, "and there is a breaking, and there is an outcry, and I know what I am looking at." They took him up to the house. The floor of the great hall at Harrowmere was black and white marble laid in 1774, and Alaric Draycott walked the length of it in kiln boots and put down a print at every step, chalk gray and perfectly clear, and nobody thought to wipe them. He stopped under the chandelier. Sir Everard was talking about warrants. The Duke stood by the long table with his hands behind his back. Mrs. Belfield had come to the drawing-room door with Clementine behind her, and there were perhaps 20 people in that hall, and Verity was on the stairs 6 steps up holding the rail. Alaric put his hand inside the collar of his shirt and drew out a silver chain with a ring on it. He lifted it over his head and threw the ring underhand onto the mahogany, and it landed and rolled and went round twice on its rim and settled, and the sound it made was not large, but it was the only sound in that room. It was a signet, heavy gold, worn thin at the shoulders. The device on the face was a lion holding a serpent. My name said, Alaric Draycott is Alaric Ambrose Draycott. My father was Ambrose Draycott, eldest son of the 2nd Duke of Raymere, who died in 1808, a year before his father. My mother was Ida Marrow of this parish. They married in April of 1798. I was born in 1801, and by the law of England I have been Duke of Raymere since the 9th of September, 1809, when I was 8 years old. He looked across the table. "You have my hall," he said, "and my kilns and my water, and you have had them for 23 years. Nobody moved." Then Crispin Draycott walked forward and picked the ring up off the table. He turned it in the light and rubbed his thumb once across the worn place on the shoulder as though he were checking a coin. And then he laughed. It was not a performance. It was a short, almost affectionate laugh, the laugh of a man who has been expecting a knock at the door for years and has just found that it is only the post. "This ring is my Uncle Ambrose's," he said. "That is quite true. He wore it, and he was buried without it, and it has been out of this house since 1808. And this gentleman is my uncle's son. That is also true, and I have never denied it, and neither did my father." He set the ring down gently on the table. "Tell them the rest," he said. "Tell them, or I will, and you would rather it came from you." Alaric said nothing. "Very well," said Crispin Draycott. He turned to the room, and he spoke to it the way a man speaks who has explained a thing many times and has grown weary of it. "My uncle did not marry in a church. My grandfather had refused his consent, and the woman was the daughter of the land agent here, a widow, and so, in April of 1798, they went up to Scotland and married by declaration. That is marriage, and I have never argued that it is not. 2 people who declare themselves before witnesses in Scotland are married, and being married in Scotland, they are married in England, and the child of it is legitimate." He paused. "They did it at the toll house on Coldstream Bridge," he said. The man who kept the bridge stood witness as he did for 100 couples a year, and entered it in his own book. His own book. Not a parish register. A private book kept by a private man as his own property, because there is no register in Scotland that records a declaration, and there never was. He looked back at Alaric. And that book, he said, does not exist. I let it sit. There is no entry, he said. No certificate. No minister, because there was no minister. The bridge keeper died in 1814. My uncle died in 1808, and your mother in 1815, and there is not one paper in the world that says the two of them ever stood up together. You have a ring. A ring proves that a man had an uncle. Blood is not proved by gold, sir, it is proved by paper, and you have none. And then mildly, almost kindly, he finished it. You know all this, he said, because the Lords told you in 1821. It was heard and left standing as not proven, which is not the same as refused, and you have been at liberty 11 years to prove it. You have not, because there is nothing to find. Meanwhile, you have spent everything you had on attorneys, and come here to dig at my kilns for 9 shillings the week, and I put it to you that a man who does that is not a duke. He is a man with a grievance. Sir Everard Bassett cleared his throat and said that in the circumstances he would commit. Crispin Draycott went to the foot of the stairs where Verity stood on the 6th step with her hand on the rail and looked up at her with something that was almost gentleness. You are wondering whether I have done a wicked thing, he said. I have not. I have declined to be dispossessed by a story. Understand that I have just kept you out of it, Miss Sowerby, and that I did that deliberately, and that you should be glad of it. He went in to dinner. The chalk prints stayed on the marble for 4 days. Mrs. Honoria Belfield struck her niece across the face in the upper passage at 7 the next morning, and it was the only time in her life she had done such a thing, and she was the more shaken of the two. You will get into the carriage, she said. No, said Verity. The trunk went down without her. She watched it go along the avenue and out at the lodge, then packed what she had into a corded box and carried it herself down the back stairs, and nobody stopped her because there was nobody left whose business it was. She had £4 11 shillings, and no character and no relation in the world who would own her. Nell Wick took her in. The Wick cottage was 2 rooms at the top end of the village with a hearth in one of them. Tobias lived. He was 5 days coming back, and his chest had gone, and for the rest of that autumn he could not walk up the lane without stopping twice, and he never lifted a barrow again. On the first evening, Nell put a tin cup on the table in front of Verity. Off the well house step, she said. I took it up when they took him off. It is yours. It is the dog's cup from Harrowmere, said Verity. Nell Wick looked at her. It is yours, she said. The county gaol at Devizes took visitors to untried prisoners on Tuesdays and Fridays. Verity walked the 7 miles because she preferred to spend the carrier's fare on paper, and she brought him paper and ink and a bundle of pens and no food at all, having decided on the road that food would be eaten in a day and paper would not. Alaric looked at what she put on the table and laughed rather too long, and she understood that it was the first time since the marble floor. You are a hard woman, he said. I am an accurate one. What do you need copied? Everything, he said. She read her copy of the contract again in the 2nd week of September on the wick table by a rushlight for the 11th time. She had been reading it as a wall. She had read it the way the whole parish read it, which is to say, she had read the fact of it 20 years sealed, signed by a duke, and had never gone along the line of it with her finger the way she would have gone along a column. She went along the line. The grant was of the water of Cadby Spring. Then it said what for the service of the said navigation, and for the use of the said lime and brickworks, and for the several purposes of the said trades, and for no other trade or manufacture within the said parish. She read it 4 times. There was nothing in it about a household, nothing about a bucket. It did not grant the water. It granted the water for trade and forbade its sale to any other trade, which was a thing men wrote in to stop a rival brewery. And it said not one word from the first line to the seal about a woman filling a pail to boil a potato. The iron door was not in the deed. £11 entered to estate repairs in 1819 for a door and a lock. No contract in the world required. hung over the only spring in the parish, 9 years before there was any contract at all. And behind it a penny, the bucket entered against wages at a rate nobody had ever set down anywhere, because nobody had ever had to. Threlfall had not been enforcing an agreement. He had been selling water in a drought, and he had let the parish be frightened of a piece of paper for 13 years, and in all that time not one soul in Nether Cadby had read it, because not one soul in Nether Cadby could. She took it to Mr. Fenn because Mr. Fenn was the only member of that board who could be moved by anything. She did not argue about miasma. She had learned that much. She put down the deed and the clause, and the table brought forward 4 fresh cases since the middle of August, all at the East Ditch end. She added a column for the households that had never stopped drawing from the spring, and left the 2 lists side by side, and said nothing at all about causes. Mr. Fenn read it standing up, and then, after a while, sat down. "I do not accept your inference," he said. "I have not made one." "No," he said, "you have not. That is what is troubling me." He tapped the sheet twice. "The air at the East Ditch is foul," he said, "and I still believe it is what kills them. But the board may order the removal of a nuisance and lay out the poor rate on cleansing, and a stagnant ditch is a nuisance by any definition, and if the people at that end are kept out of it, they must draw somewhere, and there is nowhere but the spring." He stood up and put on his hat. "I shall move it as a nuisance," he said, "and I shall move that the rate bear the cost of the water, and I shall not mention your table, because if I mention your table, Raymer will vote it down for the pleasure of voting it down. Do you understand me?" "Perfectly," said Verity. The board ordered. The ditch stopped on the 21st of September, and the spring opened to the parish for the duration of the visitation and charged it on the rate. Mr. Fenn had done the right thing for a reason that was wrong, and Verity walked home in the dark and understood 2 things at once. The first was that she had won. The second was that she had shown her hand to a man who now knew exactly what she was, and that from this day she would be dealt with. She went to law on the 4th of October, and she lost. She had it all: the wage book copied fair in her own hand, the specimen note endorsed and dated the 19th of December, 1831. The store prices against Devizes market for 7 months, and the act itself bought in a pamphlet for 1 3d, and learned nearly by heart. She laid the information against the Duke of Raymer. It was heard at the petty sessions in the room behind the Bear at Devizes by 2 magistrates, neither of them Bassett, and it took 4 minutes. The clerk asked what the defendant had done, and Verity said that he had caused workmen to be paid otherwise than in the current coin of the realm. The clerk asked to see the wage sheets, and she produced them, and he turned them over and asked her quite civilly whose signature was at the foot of them. Verity looked at 7 months of sheets at every single one and said, "Silas Threlfall." "And whose signature is on the store book?" "Silas Threlfall." "And on the notes?" "The counting house stamp." "And on the notes?" "There is no name on the notes," said Verity. The elder of the 2 magistrates was not unkind about it. He said that his Grace's endorsement upon a specimen sheet showed that he had approved a form, and that approving a form was not paying a wage, and that the act was directed at the person by whom the wages were actually paid, and that the information disclosed no offense and was dismissed. Costs were £3, and she paid them out of £4 and 1 shilling. She sat down on the bench in the passage and read the section over from the beginning, slowly, as a person reads who has just found out what it costs to skim. It was in the 6th line of the clause on recovery. No conviction should be had unless the complaint were made within 6 months after the offense committed. She sat quite still. It was the 4th of October. January was gone, and February and March. April had 11 days left in it, and every week she spent looking for a better case was a week in which another month of the evidence walked out of the door and could not be brought back. She went out into the street at Devizes with £1 and 1 shilling, and made herself say it out loud because she believed things better when she had said them. Not the man, she said, the hand. She had gone after power, and power had left no writing. She would go after the writing. She needed a workman to swear. The act allowed any person to lay the information, and that had been the whole of her hope because it meant a woman could do it. But a conviction wanted evidence out of the mouth of a man who had taken notes instead of coin, and there were 17 of them, and not one would come. Amos Cardew said no to her face on the step of his own cottage, and did her the courtesy of saying why. "I had 2 sons," he said. "They went out with the mob at Bishop's Canning's in the November of 1830 and broke a threshing machine, and they were tried at Salisbury in the January and transported for life, and a gentleman who sat on that commission is at Harrowmere now eating his dinner. I have had 1 letter in 20 months. I am 61, and I owe the store £22, and you ask me to swear against the man who keeps that book. I am said verity." "No," said Amos Cardew, and shut the door, and she did not blame him then, and she never did afterwards. She went to Nelwick last, and she did not make a speech. She sat down with a sheet of brown paper and a pencil and said, "Let me show you the figures. 4 buckets a day at a penny. 2 shillings and 4 pence in the week off 4 and 6. She wrote it. Then the store. Flour at 1 and 10, where the market is 7 pence candles, at 8 pence where the market is 3 pence. She wrote that too, and carried it and ruled it off. "You are short by 1 and 8 every week," she said. "Without a bad week, without an illness, without a shoe. £4 and 6 shillings a year, and it goes on the store book at compound, because Threlfall carries the arrears forward at Michaelmas. You are £11 down now. In 4 years you will be £30 down, and £30 cannot be paid off 4 and 6 pence, not by anybody." Nelwick did not say anything. "And then they will take the cottage," said Verity, "because the cottage goes with the work. And Tobias cannot do the work. He has a chest now, and he will always have a chest, and in 4 years he will be 18 and unable to lift a barrow, and there will be nowhere for him but the house at Devizes." She put the pencil down. "I am not asking you to be brave," she said. "I am showing you the account. Silence is not free. It has a price, and it is written there. And it is £30 and your son." Nelwick looked at the paper for a long time. Then she said, "Will they put me out before Michaelmas or after?" "I do not know," said Verity. Nelwick took the pencil out of her hand and made a mark at the bottom of the sheet because she could not write, and said then it had better be before. The information was laid against Silas Threlfall on the 11th of October, and it was laid on a Thursday because Clementine Belfield had written once and once only 4 lines, and no signature to say that Sir Everard Bassett sat on Mondays and Wednesdays and was in Bath on Thursdays. Verity never saw her again and never learned what it had cost her to send it. She wrote to Coldstream 3 times. Every letter that came back had to be paid for at the door, and the 3 of them together cost her more than a week's bread, and each told her the same thing in a different hand. There is no parish register of a declaration. There was a book kept at the toll house, and the man who kept it died in 1814, and his goods were sold, and no one living knows what became of it. The road to Scotland was shut, so she stopped looking for the marriage and went back as she always went back to the money. She had the estate servant's wage book copied out with the rest before she was turned out of the house, and she went through it quarter by quarter from 1790 to 1820. Effie Nairn, lady's maid, entered at the Lady Day quarter of 1793. Paid every quarter for 18 years without a break. Michaelmas, 11, paid. Christmas, 1811, nothing. Nothing ever again. Verity sat back. A servant who leaves is paid off. One who dies is entered as dead. One turned away, without a character, is entered as gone. There was none of that. The name simply stopped at the Christmas quarter of 1811. And there was a new line in the estate cash book that same quarter. Charitable annuity paid by the bank quarterly, beneficiary not named. Verity read it and read it again, and the room went a long way off. Paid by the bank. There was one bank. Mr. Ephraim Blount was attorney to the assignees under the commission in bankruptcy against Sowerby and Son, and he had an office in the Brittocks at Devizes with a strong room in it. And he told her kindly on the first visit that he could not let her look at anything at all. The books were not hers. They had not been her father's since March of 1826. They were vested in the assignees for the creditors, and a stranger had no more right to read them than to walk into the Bank of England. "I am a creditor," said Verity. Mr. Blount looked up. She had thought about it for 2 days on the wick table. My mother's settlement gave me £40 at 21, she said. It was charged on my father's estate and never paid, because by then he had been dead 3 years and there was nothing to pay it from. It has never been proved and never discharged. I am a creditor of that estate for £40, and I have come to prove my debt. It took 11 days. She had to swear an affidavit and produce the settlement, which was at a stationer's in Devizes among her father's papers in a box that had been there so long the man had stopped charging for it, and give notice and pay 3 and 6 in fees and pay it twice because the first affidavit was drawn wrong. Nobody was cruel to her once. Not one man in that 11 days was anything but civil. She had thought power would come at her like Threlfall quietly with a book. It did not come at her at all. It stood still and required her to be somewhere she could not afford to be with. Forms she could not afford to draw, and it would have stopped 9 women out of 10 without ever knowing their names. On the 22nd of October, Mr. Blount unlocked the strong room and set a chair for her. The ledgers were where they had always been. Her father's hand on the spines. She had ruled some of those pages herself at 15. She found the annuity in the 3rd book she opened by direction of the most noble Barnaby, Duke of Ramire, on the 9th of September, 1811. Payable quarterly. To Mrs. Effie Nairn at Coldstream in the county of Berwick. Verity put both hands flat on the page. Barnaby. Not Crispin. Crispin had been 22 in 1811, and nobody the son of a second son who had only just become a first. It was his father who burned the muniment room at Harrowmere that September and sent north and bought a private book off a bridge-keeper and put it in the fire, and then did the only thing left about the one witness he could not burn, which was to put her on a quarterly allowance for life. She turned 2 pages. Renewed and continued by direction of His Grace, Crispin Duke of Ramire. The 26th of November, 1819. His own hand. 30 years old with his father, 4 months in the ground, signing the continuation of a payment whose purpose must have been explained to him in the same room. I had not committed it. He had inherited it the way he had inherited the hall and the kilns and the lion holding the serpent, and he had looked at it and picked up a pen and gone on paying it every quarter for 13 years. Verity sat there for some minutes. Then, because she was who she was, she did not close the book. She went forward through 1820 and 1821 and 1822, reading the estate account of the house that had ruined her, and came into the winter of 1825 and turned a page and stopped. Bills accepted and unpaid at the closing of the doors. They were all listed, 31 of them. Her father had written the schedule himself the week before the end in a hand that had begun steady at the top of the page and was not steady at the bottom. Every one of them bore the same acceptance. Crispin Duke of Ramire, £9,420. She had come into that room to find a witness for another man's inheritance, and she had found the paper that killed her father, and it had lain 6 years behind a form, and nobody had put it into her hand. She had dug it up herself. She did not weep. She got out her pencil and the brown paper, and she began to copy, and she copied for 4 hours until Mr. Blount came and told her that he was obliged to lock up. The quarter sessions sat at Devizes in the first week of November. The riot count went first, and it went in 11 minutes. Verity had written the point out for his attorney in words of 1 syllable, and the attorney used it as his own, which she had expected and did not mind. A riot requires 3 persons. There was 1. 11 men stood on that ground, and every one of them stood still, and the prosecution's own witnesses said so. The malicious damage count took longer. She was called, and she said that the door had been broken to get water for a boy of 14 dying of the visitation. And then she produced the order of the local Board of Health, made 26 days afterwards, over the signature of Mr. Josiah Fenn, directing that the parish be supplied from that same spring at the charge of the rate. If it was lawful on the 21st of September, she said it was not a felony on the 26th of August. Alaric Draycott was acquitted on the 2nd of November. He came out of the gaol at Devizes, owing nothing and possessing nothing, because what little he had left after 11 years of attorneys had gone in fees and costs, and he stood in the street in a coat that had been in a cell for 10 weeks. I was free, and he was 31 years old, and in the eye of the law, He was nobody's son. He could not sue. He could not swear in information about the water, because the water was not his, nor about the estate, because the estate was not his. He had one thing left that the law would take from him, and it was the same thing it would take from any man off the road. He could stand in a room and tell the truth about what he had seen. He came back to Nether Cadby as a witness. The Duke of Ramir sent for her on the 6th of November and gave her tea. He put the paper on the table between them, face up, so that she could read it while it was being explained, which was a courtesy, and she understood it as one. £1,200. A house at Bath on a lease of 99 years. A letter, over his own name, to 3 journals stating that the reports concerning Miss Sowerby were without foundation. And a word to Mr. Lowndes upstairs at that moment that the September proposal was withdrawn with regret. For the ledgers, said Verity. For the ledgers. They are not mine to sell. They are vested in the assignees. They are copied, said the Duke, in your hand in a cottage at the top of Nether Cadby. Do not fence with me, Miss Sowerby. You are too good at figures to be any good at it. She looked at the paper. May I tell you what you are? He said. And he said it without any relish. You are 24. You have £1 and some shillings, no father, no character, no settlement, and a family that has cut you. You sleep in the second room of a woman who sifts chalk and eat what she has, and she has not enough for herself. No household in this county will take you as a governess now. In 3 years, you will not be a heroine. You will be a burden on a poor woman, which is the one thing you have spent this autumn trying to prevent. Verity said nothing, because every word of it was true. May I ask you something, she said at last. He petitioned in 1821, and you knew of it, and you let him alone. He came here in June and dug your chalk for 9 shillings a week, and you let him alone. Why now? The Duke of Ramir set down his cup. Because he was never dangerous, he said. He is a man with a grievance and no money. And there are 40 of those in England, and not one has ever taken anything off anybody. He could shout in my hall for a year and it would come to nothing. I looked at her. You are the danger, he said. You read slowly and all the way to the end, and you go back and start again, and you do not stop when you are frightened, and you cost 3 and 6 at a time, and you keep paying it. He is a story, Miss Sowerby. You are a set of books. He pushed the paper an inch nearer. Take the 1,200, he said. I am not being generous. I am buying the only thing on this estate that can hurt me. Verity stood up. No, she said, and went out and got as far as the lodge gate before she had to stop and put her hand on the pillar and wait for her legs. The price was real, and it came inside a fortnight. The county paper carried 4 lines in the miscellany column about a young person of good family at present residing in a laborer's cottage at Nether Cadby, and they did more work than 4 columns would have done because they left every reader to supply the rest. The Reverend Mr. Chidlow declined to give her the sacrament on the 3rd Sunday in November. He said that until certain matters were cleared up, he must consider the feelings of the parish, and Verity said that she understood and sat at the back, and afterwards could not remember a word of the service. A letter came from her aunt, 5 lines long, releasing her from any expectation of assistance in future, so that she might make her arrangements accordingly. It was signed in full. Verity put it in the fire and then wished for about a minute that she had not, and then stopped wishing it. The Reform Act had received the royal assent on the 7th of June. In June, it had been a thing in the London papers. By November, the schedules had been read by everyone with anything to lose by them, and Cadby Parva was in schedule. A struck out disfranchised, gone, and with it the 2 members the Ramir family had returned without a contest since 1747. He had been going to sell one of them. That was the arrangement he had made in London in the spring, and the whole of his winter had rested on it, and by the middle of November it was worth nothing because Parliament would be dissolved before Christmas, and there was no seat to sell. Mr. Ezra Lowndes came down from Bedford Row on the 14th of November and did not go away again. He took a room at Harrowmere and sat in the yellow bedroom, going through the mortgage deeds and the rent rolls at the rate of about £100 an hour. Alaric found her at the Wick door on the 20th. Stop, he said. She did not pretend to misunderstand him. "I have had 11 years of it," he said. "I know what it costs and how it ends, and I'm telling you as the only man alive who has done it. It takes everything. Not at once. It takes it in 3 and 6pences. And at the end the lords will say, 'Not proven politely,' and there will be nothing left of you." "You are asking me to stop," said Verity. "I am." "Why?" "Because I can bear it happening to me," he said. "I have had a good deal of practice." Verity stood in the doorway with the light behind her. "You have been 11 years at this on your own," she said, "and got nowhere, and I'm sorry for it, but I want you to understand why. You went at the marriage. There is nothing at the marriage. There has been nothing there since 1811, and there never will be, because a man with money made certain of it." "Then what?" "Money leaves a track," said Verity. "It cannot help it. He burned a book and bought a witness, and the burning left. Nothing but the buying went through a bank 4 times a year for 21 years, and every one of those payments had to be written down by somebody, because that is what a bank is. He can burn what he wrote. He cannot burn what other people wrote about him." Alaric looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "I am not going to be able to stop you, am I?" "No," said Verity. She went at Silas Threlfall on the 27th of November, and she did not offer him a penny. She met him in the counting-house at his own invitation, which was itself an answer, and she put the pamphlet on the desk with her thumb on the clause. "The person who pays," she said. "Not the person who owns, not the person who profits. The act punishes the person by whom the wages were paid, and I have been told so by 2 magistrates at a cost of £3, and I am the only person in Wiltshire who has had it said to her face." Threlfall did not touch the pamphlet. 7 months of wage sheets, said Verity. Everyone signed at the foot. Silas Threlfall. Not one paper in this house has his name on it, and every paper has yours. He approved a form in December, and after that, never wrote another word, and if that is not design, it is the luckiest thing that ever happened to a man. Your first information was dismissed, said Threlfall. It was, against him. The second one is laid against you, and it was laid at Devizes on the 11th of October before 2 justices who are not Sir Everard Bassett and Nell Wick has sworn it. Threlfall's hands were quite still on the desk. I am advised, he said, that a lime kiln upon an estate is not within the schedule of the act, that the burning of lime for the improvement of the land is a work of husbandry, and that the men are agricultural servants, and that the act does not reach them. Verity had been waiting a fortnight for that sentence. She took the second copybook out of her bag, made on the same 3 nights in July, and never yet needed, and opened it at the page she had marked with a thread. That is the brick and tile wage book, she said. There is no husbandry in a brick. Bricks and tiles are named in the schedule in the plainest words in the act. She turned the book round. Cardew, Yeoman, Pinnock, Wick, Draycott. The same 17 names in your hand on the brick sheet in the weeks. The brick kilns were charged. And on the lime sheet in the weeks, they were not, because you have never run 2 gangs in your life. Whatever they were on Monday, they were brickmakers by Thursday, and paid in your notes on both. Silas Threlfall sat for a long time and looked at the page. Then he said, What do you want? I want to know who told you to draw those notes, said Verity. In writing you have none, and in evidence you have your own mouth, and it is the only thing you own now that is worth anything at all. Who approved the pattern on the 19th of December. And Threlfall, who had not raised his voice in 19 years, said the name. The petition of 1821 was revived, and it was revived by a man with no interest in justice whatsoever. Mr. Ezra Lowndes held a mortgage of £11,000 over an estate, and had been shown by a woman who copied things in pencil onto brown paper that there was a serious question whether the man who granted it had ever owned an acre. A mortgagee in that position does not wait. He instructed counsel within a week, and a commission issued to take evidence upon the claim at Devizes in December. Mrs. Effie Nairn came down from Coldstream at 63 at the expense of the estate she had helped to steal, frightened all the way, and frightened in the room, and she told the truth. She had stood 2 paces off in April of 1798 in the front room of the toll house on Coldstream Bridge when Mr. Ambrose Draycott and Mrs. Ida Pike Widow declared themselves man and wife. The bridgekeeper wrote it in his book, and she put her own name under it as witness, and she wrote her name for the examiner so that he could see the hand. In the September of 1811, a gentleman had come to her from the family, and she was told what would happen if she stayed in England and what would be paid if she went, and she went. And it was paid every quarter for 21 years, and she had taken every penny of it, and she was ashamed. And there was no help for that now. The ledger of Sowerby and Son was put in and read. Opened by direction of Barnaby Duke of Raymer, September 1811. Renewed and continued by direction of Crispin Duke of Raymer, November 1819. Verity at the back, with her hands in her lap, allowed herself perhaps 10 seconds to believe it was finished. Then Crispin Draycott's counsel rose and said that they would call one witness. His name was Gatrell, a Bristol man of about 60, decently dressed, and he said that he had known Reuben Pike in the merchant service, that Pike had married Ida Marrow of Nether Cadby in 1794, that he had seen Pike alive at Bristol in the spring of 1799, and that he had heard he was drowned off the Irish coast that December. If it were so, the woman who declared herself at Coldstream in April of 1798 had a husband living, and the declaration was void from the beginning. Not voidable. Void. There had been no marriage at all, and the child of it was illegitimate, and 11 years and one dead witness's book, and 21 years of hush money came to precisely nothing. The examiner adjourned until 10 the following morning. Verity Sowerby had one night. She did not go looking for a death certificate because there were none in England in 1797, and she knew it. She went to the vestry at Nether Cadby with a lantern, and the sexton's boy holding it took down the register of burials, turned back to 1797, and found the leaf cut out. It had been done with a knife against a straight edge close into the gutter, and done well, but the cut edge was paler than the paper round it. And Verity put her thumb on it, and knew with a kind of cold joy that she was looking at the second crime, and not the first. Burial registers get searched. She put it back and took down the thing beside it, which nobody had ever searched in the history of that parish, because there is nothing in it but money. The churchwarden's account book. A parish writes down what it receives. Fees for the ground, fees for the bell, fees for the pall, if the pall is used written in a book at the time, and footed at Easter, and no one falsifying a burial ever thinks of it, because a lie about a man is a large thing, and 8 and 6pence is a small one. She went through the year with her finger. November 1797, received for the grave. And the greater bell at the burial of Reuben Pike, mariner of this parish, 8 shillings and 6pence. 5 months before Coldstream. Ida Marrow had been a widow when she declared herself lawfully and beyond argument. Gatrell had sworn a lie, somebody had paid him to swear it, and somebody had cut a leaf out of a parish register to make it stand up. Verity closed the book and sat down on the step of the vestry in the dark. Then she thought about the other thing. She had copied the annuity pages and the schedule of bills on the 22nd of October, and on the 19th of November had gone back and had the copies examined against the originals and sworn before a commissioner for oaths at a cost of 10 shillings and 6pence she did not have, and Mr. Blount had asked why she troubled, since the originals were safe in his strong room. Because they are in his county, she had said. She had left the originals exactly where they were. That was the part she never explained to anybody afterwards. She had needed him to come for them. She had told Mr. Fenn and the parish constable and the elder of the 2 justices who had dismissed her first information, a Mr. Harbottle, who did not sit with Sir Everard Bassett and did not dine with him either. She had told them a fortnight in advance and been believed by exactly one of the 3, which was enough. Crispin Duke of Raymer came to the Brittocks at 1:15 on the morning of the 17th of December with a lantern and a 2-gallon can of oil, and he was seen to try the shutter of Mr. Blount's back office and to go in at it, and he was taken in the strong room passage with the can in his hand and the oil already going down onto the boards. I was quiet about it. He said nothing except once to the constable that this was a mistake, and the constable said, "Yes, your grace," and held on to him. They took him to the Bear until morning. It was arson. That was the whole of the irony, and nobody in Wiltshire needed it explained. Not the annuity, not the burning of a bridgekeeper's book in 1811, which had been his father's crime and not his, not even the 31 bills. Arson and conspiracy to procure false evidence, and a man convicted of the first went out of the country for life. 30 men of that parish and the parishes round it had gone out of the country for the same word 2 winters before, out of a room Crispin Draycott had sat in as a matter of courtesy and had concurred in. I was committed to the assizes at Salisbury. Silas Threlfall was convicted summarily under the Truck Act on the 9th of January, 1833, before 2 justices at Devizes on the evidence of Nell Wick and his own wage sheets. He was fined the full penalty on 9 counts and dismissed, and the men recovered their wages over again in the current coin of the realm every week of them from the 11th of April, 1832. The first 3 months of that year were out of time and could not be brought back, which Verity had known since October and never forgave herself for. Amos Cardew's £22 at the store went out with the note that made it. The estate did not go to the Crown, and it did not go to Alaric Draycott, because that is not how land behaves. Mr. Ezra Lowndes entered into possession under his mortgage the moment the interest fell into arrear and appointed a receiver, and the receiver found 19 years of accounts kept in a system that only one living person could read. He sent for her the same week and offered her £60 a year and her board. Verity Sowerby took it. It was the first money she had ever earned, and it did not come from Alaric Draycott, and it did not come from anybody's gratitude, and that mattered to her more than she could ever make him understand. The claim of peerage was not decided. It went up to the Committee for Privileges in the spring and was still there at the end of the year, because it was not a matter a churchwarden's account book could finish only start. On the morning it went up, Alaric said the only thing about it he ever said. "They will want to make me the 5th, he said, "if they ever make me anything. And I shall not have it. I have been the 3rd Duke of Ramire since the 9th of September, 1809, whatever anybody in London decides. It is not the title. It is the 23 years. The spring at Cadby was conveyed to the churchwardens and overseers of the parish of Nether Cadby in the March. The well-house was re-roofed out of the rate. The iron door was taken off its hinges and carried to the smith and cut up, and no new door was hung, and the vestry carried it by 4 votes to 1. It was October when he asked her a year and a quarter after the pitcher and the tin cup. There was mist on the chalk that morning, and the kilns were going, and the slope smelled of burnt lime. Nell Wick brought the cup out to the well-house, put it in Verity's hand, and went away again, which was not an accident, and Verity stood there with it and knew that it was not. Alaric Draycott had nothing to offer her. He said so. He said that he had no name, a court would recognize no money, and no prospect of either that the committee might sit 6 years or 10, that he was 32 and burned lime for a receiver at 9 shillings a week, and that he had no right to ask her anything, and that he was going to ask her anyway. Verity heard him out. Then she said 3 things. I waited. "Every payment goes through my hands," she said. "Not most. All. I will not live in a house where money moves in a room I am not in." Agreed. Second, that door is not going back on. Not by you, not by a receiver, not by a committee of the House of Lords, not in a drought, not ever. Agreed. And third, said Verity Sowerby, I shall need a larger desk. She turned round and filled the tin cup from the spring out of the trough where anybody in that parish could put a bucket at any hour of the day or night without asking a single living soul, and she handed it to him. In July of 1832, that cup of water had been entered in a book as 4pence and charged against the wages of a woman who sifted chalk. It was not worth anything now. That was the whole of what they had done, and it had taken them 15 months, and neither of them ever thought it was small.